going to hit record now. And welcome to our February Lunch and Learn brought by the Inclusivity Committee and conducted today by Beth Thomas, Nakia Reed, and Natalia Johnson. And I'm super excited to have them here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but first I'm going to tell you that you are here to learn about what are some of the most important influences to consider when serving global populations. So how to best serve global and marginalized populations that are affected by crime, how to navigate some of the common issues, the expectations, and some of the challenges that they have. And they're going to talk to us about what some of the services that are available are for those affected by crime and what specific issues they're facing, and what some of the benefits and challenges in hosting advocacy services through law enforcement. So if you have questions, you can ask those as they come, or we may have some time at the end if you want to save them for them, but you are more than welcome to go ahead and send them as they come. And without anything else, Beth, I'm going to let you take it away and you all can introduce yourselves.
Great. Thank you so much, Chloe and the Tennessee Coalition for hosting us. We're very grateful. Also, just so that all of you know, Chloe's birthday was yesterday, so wish her a very happy birthday. As she mentioned, we are looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better as well. So we've invited some prompts there on the first slide. But we're going to tell you a little bit about ourselves. So my name is Beth, and I use she, her pronouns. I work for the civilian Mnpd Family Intervention Program as a refugee and immigrant victim advocate. They're in the Family Safety Center, as you can see pictured on the top there, which is connected to headquarters. And I, before I became an advocate about 2 years ago, I was an English teacher. And I taught English to international students from ages 16 to 60, and did that for about 10 years in Nashville. So my background really is in teaching. It's in global, learning from global people. And I am so thankful that I was connected to this role. And I'm also thrilled to be presenting today with my friends, Officer Natalia Johnson and Officer Nakia Reed, and I will let them introduce themselves. Officer Reed, why don't you go first?
Hey everyone, good afternoon. Glad that you joined in, glad to be here. Thank you, Beth, for inviting us to come. I am the LGBTQ liaison for the department and work within our Office of Community Outreach and Partnership Unit. I've been on the department since 2015, and during that time I've been a patrol officer, been a school resource officer, and then now the liaison since 2019. So, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to be with you guys today. Thank you again, Beth, for having us. I have been on the department since 2018. I did a short stint in patrol, and then I did some time in investigations, doing some detective work. Then I moved to a community engagement team at a precinct level, and now I am also a part of the Office of Community Outreach and Partnerships. I'm happy to be here and excited to get started.
Great. We, if you're just joining us, we're inviting you to offer your name and agency contact info and your favorite winter activity. So please add that in the chat box. So when I was preparing for this presentation, the way that it was advertised was somewhat like the graphic in the upper left corner, sort of like, here we're going to talk about these things and how they overlap, but really, as I think all of us in this virtual room can agree, it's much more complex than that. When we talk about influencing factors in serving global clients, it's so many different levels, so many different kinds of complexities. So just putting that out there, I think we all agree with that and understand that. So if if I could add another graphic, I'd put a big circle around that lower mind map and just put the time constraint of an hour. So added to the complexity, we have the limits of, we're really going to try to make this efficient, and hopefully it will address some of the interests and concerns that you have. But we have, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep moving. So a brief overview, we'd like to hear from you. I'd like to offer just a few guiding themes. We'll talk briefly about Tennessee and Nashville, their immigrant and refugee populations, and then we'll just jump in to some of the questions. We only have 4 questions, but they, of course, have lots of different layers. So we'll end on resources, and we'll go from there, okay? So what about you? I'm guessing that a lot of us are working in victim services, maybe in legal, health, education, social work fields, advocates of all types, right? Advocacy is not just a profession. It definitely is a mentality. It's a heart. And that is a big reason that I really am excited to have invited Officer Reed and Officer Johnson with us, because I know that part of their hearts are just resonate with that advocacy. So grateful they're here. Some guiding thoughts are here on the page, and this is just something that I'd like to offer, something that I have absorbed as a person working with people. Important elements to bring to the table, and hopefully will kind of be woven into our conversation today, and we'll revisit those later as well. So we'll start with Tennessee as a state, and then we'll kind of focus in on Nashville. I realize that many of us on the call are from many different places in Tennessee. So any guesses how many Tennesseans were born in another country? So not just Nashville, but Tennesseans. Any guesses? Okay, 5. Thanks, Phyllis. Good guess. Anybody else? 10%? Oh, you're throwing the percents. I'm terrible at math. Anybody else got an idea? So maybe Regina, you can help me with the math. So it's actually 1 in 20 Tennesseans were born in another country. Yeah, 1 in 10, almost, Chloe, for those in Nashville. So just to make a quick clarifying point, of course, immigrants are those who may come to another country for business, school, any kind of reason, but different from a refugee who has to come fleeing for their personal safety for various reasons, right? Less than 1% of refugees worldwide are offered the opportunity of third country resettlement. So less than 1% of refugees worldwide get the chance to go to a third country to start over again. So refugees in Tennessee, you can see statistics here since 2002. Very interesting to see how they really are different. You kind of see an increase and then a real drop. So this only goes to 2019, so it'll be interesting to see how those statistics change. You can see where they are resettled all across the state and from all across the globe. So now just kind of focusing in on Nashville. And this is, to be honest, this is a little bit dated, but between 2000 and 2012, almost 60% of Nashville's overall population growth were immigrants. And just highlighting on this page, this one statistic that about 1 in 3 children under 18 live in a bilingual home or non-English speaking home. I would say limited English speaking home. Very grateful for the Nashville Mayor's Office of New Americans. By the way, I want to share with everyone all of these hyperlinks you might see in the screen, even though we won't be visiting those. I'm more than happy to share those hyperlinks. If you're interested in the actual slides, I just invite you to email me. But the links are for sure. We are more than happy to share those with you. And again, a lot of words on this slide, but just pointing out that about, like Chloe had mentioned, 1 in 10, well, about 12% in Nashville. And we're home to a lot of different, communities. So curious, anybody know what kind of refugee histories we might have in our incredibly diverse city? Largest ones are Kurdish. Also would add to that, in recent resettlement would include Burmese, Somali, Iraqi. We have some older refugee histories. So of course, based on administrative changes, global conflicts, different refugee communities may have sort of like waves of resettlement. So some of the older ones you can see there, some of the newer ones are here as well. By all means, this is not comprehensive. I will point out the reason we kind of listed more ethnic groups under Myanmar is because we wanted to just exhibit that, when we're talking about communities, they're very diverse even within themselves. So just because someone may come from a country like Myanmar and may have even more complexities like being born in a refugee camp in Thailand, we have to ask more questions to know more. And of course, Myanmar has had a lot of traumatic changes recently with the military coup. We'll talk about this again later, but the task force, the Nashville Task Force on Refugees and Immigrants, is a collective of concerned individuals and agencies, and we will have a meeting featuring Myanmar next Tuesday. So anyone who's interested in learning more about Myanmar are welcome to come. We have a guest speaker, Tet, who'll be informing us a little bit more about what's been going on. Okay, so just jumping in with questions. What are important questions? And when I say, influences, when I say influences, that might be, all sorts of things. So under this one question, we're gonna just briefly touch on a lot of different things, such as the vulnerabilities that these communities are coming from. So when we talk about histories of trauma, not just individual, not just family, but like Myanmar, nation, the internal conflicts that have happened or are happening. You can look down through this list. I mean, I'd be very curious what your experiences are in working with friends, neighbors, family members, clients. This is not just limited to our work lives, but beyond. So a lot of times, so if we could picture this training, it's sort of like concentric circles, right? So we have global and marginalized people, maybe limited English proficient individuals, but also we're really focusing on those whose lives have been touched by crime in some way. And so even more specific, more focused. But these vulnerabilities could apply to a lot of different kinds of people, right? Not just people from global backgrounds. And when you think about these risks, think about, wow, how they could really make individuals and families even more likely to be affected by a crime, especially the isolation. Kinds of crime could be anything from labor and sex trafficking to, domestic violence in the home, to fraud and scams. So like these vulnerabilities definitely contribute or could contribute to the ways that they will be impacted later on. So equal opportunity employment, that third bullet, just, we have a lot of, I'm sure you have examples of knowing people who were doctors and teachers and professors in their homeland and now are working at Tyson. So what does equitable employment look like then? Transportation is often an issue because how do you get your driver's license if you can't take the test, if you don't know that language that the test is offered in? And of course, we might say the big elephant in the room is mistrust of police. I mean, we're here as employees of Mnpd, and that is often a factor because maybe police were not trustworthy entities in their homeland. And maybe the encounters they've had with police in this country have not been affirming or safe to them. So part of the reason that Officer Reed and Officer Johnson and I are here is we really believe that, trying to create relationships and bridges of understanding is doing outreaches together, doing trainings together, being present together, connecting in different ways. And so that's part of the attempt of addressing this particular vulnerability. And it's very real and very understandable. And then of course, we'll get into more of the nuances with misunderstandings with language access, but I think it's interesting to note, technology use. I'm in touch with some people right now that I'm campaigning with, and it's over an internet form. So how can we make this, how do we get the assistance we need, not only with all these other things going on, but with the right app or the right technology. Something interesting to note, some of you may not know this, but the non-emergency number in Nashville for police, fire, and medical, there's a long message now that is directing folks to Hub Nashville to put in those requests with an app. So something that's immediately applicable to us anyway. So keeping in mind that there's a lot of risks, there's also a lot of strengths. And that's really important for us to remember that, often we focus a lot on the obstacles, the challenges, which makes sense because we're trying to solve problems. We're trying to create healthy communities, but it's also important. And I'm sure all of us can agree that this is about celebrating the strengths of humans and humankind. I found this cartoon recently. I really appreciate the creative talents of Malachi Ray Rimpin. So again, other influences that are important to remember are some broad cultural tensions. So this particular cartoon is for those living in another country, which I don't know, have any of you lived in another country or studied another language? But consider the truth of this cartoon for not just living abroad, but also the ways we might approach our global neighbors. So notice here when we're talking about cultural tensions, and I do want to just say this, like this training is not meant to be cultural training. It's not a cultural training. This is one slide we're going to offer as sort of a hope that as we explore these tensions, and I mean tension not in a way of like a point of stress, but really to avoid the binary ways that we often think about nuance. So notice, and as I'm going to present these sort of line by line, we did not use verses, but we try to use and. So think of these as like on a continuum, because we know that, cultures are not the same, families are not the same, individuals are not the same, and individuals are not the same according to each context that we might find ourselves in, right? So here's just one example. So collectivism and individualism. this might beg the question, like, who do we depend on? Do we depend on the group? Do we depend on ourselves? Or oneself? Does one depend on the individual? And what does freedom mean? Would one sacrifice their own ambition for the sake of the group? So I know these are very abstract, so I'm going to try to bring in one example for each of these. So recently, I accompanied a family to court. It was a domestic violence situation. The family was from a group, an ethnic group in Burma. And the domestic violence situation really escalated, and one of the children, adult children, called the police, called for service. Very brave thing to do. But when they were in court, the child I shouldn't say child, but the relationship was daughter. So the daughter was sitting in a room with 8 family members. So what could be important in this situation is that, maybe the daughter's thinking about the belonging with the family, collectivism, but here she made a very individual choice for what she considered to be a safe and the best thing to do in that circumstance. So how do you handle that? How do you go about with awareness and with gentleness? And so one of the reasons that played out was a separate interview with her, not in front of family, just to see if she had any questions or was experiencing pressure from family. And there's a lot more that could be, how that unfolded throughout the day, but that was just one example. I think that really plays into the community influence and personal responsibility, which really is the question of, like, what is justice then? What is our notion of justice, and how do we approach problem solving? And how does this relate to a broader beliefs about fate and determinism and agency? I like to bring in just a more lighthearted example from my teaching career, when students didn't bring their homework, and the reasons they gave me for not completing their homework, might be totally related to other controlling factors instead of, the choice to do the homework or not. So I found myself introducing personal responsibility as a cultural value, and in helping them prepare for higher education in the US. So very interesting. Never thought I'd be doing that, but there you go. Another nuance might be the communication, the indirect communication. And I think as a really great example for this recently, I was talking to a Swahili speaking individual, and I kept receiving the answer, okay, thank you, in response to me offering services. So we went ahead with all these different services that she might be interested in. And then later there, the other partners were like, hey, we've had a really hard time getting in contact with this person. And, it was hard for me to kind of circle around and get in touch with the client. And it just seemed like maybe, I don't know if this is true or not, but maybe the okay, thank you was not, yes, I'm interested in the service, but rather, I'm responding to this offer in a different way. So maybe a little bit more indirect. And what does that have for me in my learning of other ways I could ask, or other ways that I might go about really discovering what is important to that client. Okay, so honor and shame, and guilt and innocence, and fear. So these are questions like how, if there's a person from an honor and shame background, maybe they might ask, how will people see me if I do this action? Someone from a guilt innocence background might say, is it fair or is it unfair? And someone from a fear background might say something like, or might ask, am I going to get hurt if I do this action? And how those really apply for someone in a domestic violence situation or in, interpersonal violence situation, how they will be processing their own situation was important to them at that time, and what what our clients might be navigating. That could be very different from the ways we would navigate it. So how about hierarchy and equality? So how does one see authority, and how does one see the relationship with others, and not just relationship with people, but relationship with systems? Kind of a heartbreaking example for this was a Nepali speaking person who was the victim of an aggravated assault and had received a gunshot wound. He recovered, but the person who shot him was a juvenile. And through the court process, it was decided that that juvenile would not be transferred to adult court. So the consequences for a juvenile and the consequences for an adult are very different. And the court processes, there was a different court process for him. And so I worked with the victim witness coordinator at the DA's office to explain multiple times what this young person, what the consequences were. So it wasn't jail time, it wasn't anything like that, but being in the under the oversight of other government agencies for the time being. To him, to the victim, I think it really just didn't seem like a lot. He was very concerned that what had happened to him was going to happen to other people, and I think that's a very understandable concern. So here he is recovering from physically, trying to recover from the trauma, experiencing through language interpretation what all of this means for him as far as his court case really coming to an end. Well, several weeks later, he contacted me because he was being called in for jury duty. So someone who had just experienced the court process in a very specific way was now being called on, because he's a citizen, to be on the jury. So it's sort of the irony there. I'm not sure it really fits on the hierarchy equality theme, but I think it's just an interesting story to bring up when we're talking about relationships with systems and people, and just his experience. And then finally, just offering this actually, I guess these next two: relationship, being person-oriented versus efficiency, time-oriented or task-oriented. And here's where I am super guilty about this, because as much as I truly value relationships, I love getting stuff done. And so it's very easy for me to really fall on the efficiency and really emphasize that. And I think a good example of that is one day when I was teaching, I was walking through the hallway. I would walk between hallways between classes, and we had 10 minutes between classes. So usually I was going from point A to point B very quickly. And I would say, several days later, one of my students from Saudi Arabia asked me, are you angry with me, Beth? Because you haven't said hello to me, in the hallway. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not angry with you at all. But it was definitely, he was valuing the relationship, and I was valuing, got to get these lesson plans done, or got to get the papers graded or whatever, which, neither of those things is, could we say a moral judgment like that? But it was something that really opened my eyes to see how he was viewing my efficiency oriented self. So how does that look like when we're walking down the hallway in court, or trying to, serve our clients, or, whatever that might look like for us. So continuing, again, all of this is under that first question of like, what are influences that we should consider when serving global clients? Oftentimes it's, strong expectations. So I'm sure Officer Reed and Officer Johnson have great stories about the expectations they've encountered in serving community members, but some examples for that I've encountered, and this is not an exhaustive list either, but the idea like, please do it for me. This is I think an exact quote from a client, please get me a new house, which I'll have to explain like, I can't really do that. But, if we're talking about safety planning and, temporary assistance for you to have the space to make decisions that you want to, like, we can definitely talk about that. Or maybe tell me what to do. An example is, should I get that order of protection? Should I divorce him? It's like, well, I can listen and I can reflect back what I've heard you say, but, those are questions that the client has to decide. And oftentimes, they may be very confused or very overwhelmed. Maybe they don't respond to calls from us. Again, very understandable. But how do we navigate that? How do we navigate that with humility and persistence and courage, patience and presence, some of those, those recurring or guiding themes. And again, of course, there might be that, I'm fine. I have no problems. Everything's fine. And sometimes something that has helped me learn more from a client who says this is to start offering specific services that our agency can provide. And we will introduce those to you as well. And sometimes that brings up, just as it's just the human part of connecting. It takes time. And over that time, they may start feeling more comfortable to say, what's really going on for them. Okay, so question 1, check. So let's just try another one. Some specific issues important for service providers to remember when we're engaging with our global clients. So these will go a little bit faster. Something that I found very helpful is to approach with some basic human rights education, because depending on where they have their own experience, especially when engaging with our criminal justice system, this might be a new, not new, but maybe a different concept, or maybe hasn't been explained the same way. People have rights. Men and women have rights. Children have rights. Older adults have rights. Even animals have rights in the United States. So that has been very helpful as sort of a starting point. And also going back to this, the example of the family in court from Burma, something that, there were felony charges that in court that day were bound over to the grand jury. And one thing that was emphasized, I think, really beautifully by the victim witness in the DA's office is that, they had the responsibility of prosecuting this case. There were laws in Tennessee. The actions that this person did broke one of those laws. And this is not because of anything that the family had said or had not said, because they had to testify in front of the defendant about what had happened that day. And so you can imagine, family-oriented, community-oriented. Here they are, daughter is talking about this family member in the same courtroom. So many, complexities happening. But for us to kind of step in and say, this isn't about what you have done. A law was broken and the responsibility of DAs to prosecute. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. And especially, I think, important for that daughter who made the choice for safety to call for service, a very brave thing to do. To know this was not her fault, but she's seeing a family member, having to face those consequences. which again brings up a whole nother host, of questions about what can we ask about our own ideas and the ways that we approach how embedded our criminal justice system is in our own cultural values. Not making moral judgments here, just, how unique it is. And we can be so immersed in it and not see how different this might be as an experience for our clients. So language access is such a huge part of justice, I guess I'm going to use that word. And there's a great article by the Asian Pacific Institute on gender-based violence. It's that link at the very bottom. I highly recommend it. And it talks about language justice, really kind of helping us broaden our imagination for what language access really is. Phenomenal examples, just great. I highly recommend it. So of course, on a basic level, it's yes, providing language interpretation from, on a phone or in person. Just a quick comment there, it might really be beneficial for someone to have that phone interpretation because it may be less likely that that person is in their community. So if you have an in-person interpreter in your city and they speak that language, how likely it is that they have actually connections somewhere in the community. So then they know everybody's business sort of thing. And even though there's the confidentiality requirement, how does the client feel about that? So having a phone interpreter, and some clients have even said, like, I want to know where the interpreter is. I'm in Nashville, the interpreter's in Florida. Okay, we're okay. So just clients might be, maybe they will want to know that. Having translated materials is very, very important. And part of that, text messaging sometimes it makes things much more accessible. Having links texted. I'm not as young as I look, and technology has changed a lot. And text messaging actually has been such a gift for so many clients because that's their preferred way of communicating sometimes. And of course, for the hard of hearing, deaf, capital D or little d, if you're part of the deaf community, capital D, or don't consider yourself part of the deaf community, there's so many ranges of how one might find belonging or associate themselves. So language access, I'm sure you guys in the audience have much more to add to that, but it's such a crucial part of making sure our services stay relevant and stay helpful. This is a great little cartoon that I like to I have no idea what some of these idioms mean, but I did think it was just fun. It was fun to look at. I will give one more example about language access. I was speaking to a Liaison first language speaker, but we were speaking in English. She speaks some English, and she said to me in the context of her long work hours, she said to me, quote, "Sometimes I think to kill myself," unquote. And I thought, oh, okay. So I asked her, well, do you think about killing yourself a lot? And she clarified, to use a paraphrase, that we're more, or, a colloquium we might be more familiar with, is that she thought she'd work herself to death. So she wasn't thinking about death by suicide. She was thinking about how hard she was working, the toll it was taking on her. So that was a conversation in English, but emphasizes how critical it is for us to negotiate meaning, to verify, to clarify, to sometimes a very helpful question I've asked clients is, can you tell me what you understood? And that's not demeaning in any way. It's just to try to ensure that we're all on the same page. Speaking of idioms, one that I used recently with a phone interpreter was, I just wanted to give you a heads up. I mean, it's a pretty common idiom, right? I just want to give you a heads up. But in that case, when I said it to the interpreter handled it beautifully. I think, I don't know, seemed to. But in my mind, I was like, oh, that's something that, you might want to be aware of, that you don't use that kind of idiom when you're being interpreted, just for the ease of communication. Another one I hear often is our non-emergency number is 862-8600. And I hear that said all the time, 8600. That's not an idiom, but it is a certain way that we say things. So would it sometimes it'd be actually better to say 8600? Would that make it clearer for our clients? Just one example. And of course we have, so many different points of contacts, so many different systems. And these are, just examples that have come up in case management in my own experience, but that can be really overwhelming to a client or very confusing. I have a civil legal case with my order of protection, and now I have a criminal case with the violation of order of protection. And I'm working with, maybe I'm working with legal aid, maybe I'm working with Tennessee Coalition, maybe I'm working with DCS or Adult Protective Services, or maybe schools, or maybe the resettlement agency, maybe, the list goes on and on and on. So having different issues, different people, different points of contact can be very overwhelming. So how can we, as advocates, be sensitive to that and try to take some of the burden off of that, or just provide even like a sheet with, hey, these are your points of contact, all in one piece of paper. That can be really helpful. Let's say if someone who may not come from, may not have completed all of their education, or may not be literate in English or in their first language. There's lots of different types of ways that maybe we could help offer support. So just bringing up those guiding themes one more time. I'd like to add a few, just the mutuality, dignity, and holding space. And when I say holding space, it's, sometimes we just need space for things to be confusing. The reality is things are confusing. And for someone to say, yeah, they're confusing, and not necessarily have to fix that, but to be in that space with someone else, as committing ourselves to saying, I'm going to be with you and walk with you through this confusing space. Holding space doesn't always mean having to carry or to solve or to fix, but it's offering that in different ways. Okay, here we are. Benefits and challenges of hosting services through law enforcement. I'll be honest, I never anticipated being in the phenomenal company of so many fascinating colleagues. And I would say one of the benefits of being an advocate with law enforcement is this network of services in threefold. So one, I'm connected to a victim services program, which are all civilian advocates and counselors. I say mature because Mnpd has been offering victim services since 1975. And from my experience with other kinds of advocacy work, they may be at different, in a law enforcement, depending on the size, et cetera. I mean, there could be many different reasons, but they could be just starting on establishing a victim services program, or I have not heard of another advocate specifically working with refugees and immigrants in a law enforcement agency. My colleague Karen Ramirez and myself both do this work with refugees and immigrants, but I haven't heard of other law enforcement agencies. So if you do know, I would love to connect with them because it's very exciting. but I think that the advantage of being with a victim services program is that we can staff cases more easily and share information and collaborate on both the social services advocate and therapeutic counseling needs of a person. The second huge benefit is being part of law enforcement agency with sworn individuals. So my colleagues, Officer Johnson and Officer Reed, they have a badge, and again, they can save your life. I cannot. But the benefit of being with them is, again, sharing those same, or different resources, being able to really, the ways that they are offering intervention into communities who need safety and resources are very unique to mine. But being able to share this together is such a, I think, I'm hopeful, beneficial to our communities. And I think the unique thing in Nashville is that we're very proximate to the Metro Office of Family Safety's Family Safety Center. Trying to say that really fast several times. But amazing partner, one of the largest family justice centers in the country. So one roof for victim services. Many of you on the call have had a chance to visit. Some of you are partners within that building, which is wonderful. So sometimes it's a little confusing. Some people might think, oh, we work for the Family Safety Center, but we're actually sharing that space very gratefully in order to serve our clients. So what could collaboration actually look like? Here are some examples. I had an officer call me one time to provide follow-up for a Kenya Rwandan speaker. I had another officer call me one time because there was a car accident. This was very interesting. There was a car accident there was an English speaking person involved. There was an unknown speaker involved. They didn't know what language that person spoke. So again, going back to like the text messages and the cell phone technology, I asked, can I FaceTime with you? And so when I FaceTime and I said, what language do you speak? I got an answer right away. And sometimes it's just that, using different technology in different ways. So being able to assist with that. Of course, case management, of course, different ways of accompanying or exchanging information. We do want to be clear that, we advocates and counselors, we need a signed release from the client. So the client is fully informed about, how their information is being shared, or we're getting their permission. And of course, inviting that community trust together. So I will stop talking and let Officer Johnson tell you a little bit about the Office of Community Outreach and Partnerships.
Thank you, Beth. You provided so much good information. I'm going to say that's kind of hard to follow up on, but I'll do my best. So myself and Officer Reed are part of the Office of Community Outreach and Partnerships. And so I'm going to just give like a general overview of how this office was composed. And then I'm going to pass it over to Officer Reed so she can go into a little bit more depth about, I would say, instead of responsibilities, but initiatives of the individuals in the office. So this group is composed of officers who were, I would say, hand selected by our captain. Our captain is Carlos Lara, and he went through the department, and I would say he listened and did research and tried to find people not based on how long they've been on the department or, how well they did their job as patrol officers, but individuals who took initiative, whether it was to a community they were already connected to by culture, maybe a group that they spoke the same language as, And we all have different initiatives where we're just going out into the community and being kind to people, to be straightforward. Not necessarily, based on how long or how much time we've been on the department. So an example is myself. I use myself. I've been on the department since 2018, and I've bounced around a lot. So I didn't have a whole lot of experience in patrol, but when I would go out to patrol, you can tell how people interact with the community based on maybe if they're complained on or not, right? Or working with veteran officers, and maybe I came across calls where people maybe didn't speak English. So just taking that extra mile to, hey, you know what? I don't speak the language, but I got a phone. I could pull up my app to translate until we can get someone out here, to better assist, things of that nature. So people who are in this office were chosen because of their personal initiatives and basically their lifestyle and who they are in regards to helping others. So next, in regards to what our office does. So rather than a precinct level community engagement team where they work in a footprint, so they'll work in a specific area to address specific concerns or frustrations of that community, and that it's just in that one area, and they're there all the time. And the people in this community may grow to have bonds and specific relationships, close-knit relationships where they may know the officers by name. That still exists, but this office was created to reach out to communities who have been underserved. So maybe communities who, English is not the first language, where they haven't had much communication at all with the police, or they feel like because of where they originate from, law enforcement was corrupt. So when they see a police car or something happens, they're like, I don't really want to call the police because where I'm from, the police are corrupt. Or a community that did have a relationship with the police department, and there have been some mistrust or some things that have happened to cause a break in the relationship. Our responsibility in the Office of Community Outreach and Partnerships is to go into these communities, build relationships with the stakeholders, and whether it's of a religious organization or a nonprofit organization that's already working in the area, a business or a family or an elder, a person who is up in age and they know everybody in the community and they know what their frustrations are and they know what their complaints are specifically with law enforcement, and to sit down and just have a conversation, whether it's over a cup of tea or breaking bread together. And unfortunately, COVID has put a little bit of a hindrance on that, but just to sit and have these conversations and say, hey, we are aware that it is not only a responsibility, but an obligation of your local law enforcement department to come and sit and understand what it is, regardless of our cultural differences, regardless of language barriers, regardless of these things. We need to sit down and we need to understand how we can assist. How can we help? So the different officers in our office will get these meetings set up. We'll sit down and frustrations can be shared. So then we can take those frustrations back to the precinct where that area, specifically where that area is. We can sit down with the community officer, the community outreach officer, so the COCO for that area, as well as the community engagement teams, which are the officers and leaders who have constant contact, should have constant contact with the stakeholders of the community. So an example, I'll use response time to calls, right? So say I go out and I have a meeting in an area that's been untouched, right? Or just there's been an issue with law enforcement. And I go out and I sit down with the stakeholder and we have a meeting and they explain, you know what? One of our biggest problems is we call the police in this, to come to this area, you guys take forever to show up. And I take note of that. And it is my responsibility and obligation to take that back to that precinct. And I sit down and have a conversation. I say, I met with this community. I met with the stakeholders. This was what was explained to me. We need to address this. So let's not just write it down on a piece of paper or sticky note, put it somewhere. We're going to address it. So then I will still have communication with the stakeholder in that community, and I'll call back and I say, hey, you want to meet up again? Or maybe it's a Zoom call, maybe it's a phone call, whatever's comfortable for that stakeholder. And they say yes. We'll meet back up and they'll explain, yes, from the last meeting, this has been the progress. And this is where we're moving forward, and we appreciate, let's move on to the next thing. Or they might say, no, actually it hasn't been addressed. And so there's going to be a level of accountability that may not have been there before, but it won't go unseen, because now you have a person, myself or another officer from the community outreach and partnership team, who will reach back out to someone at a higher level. And so we operate out of headquarters, and we could go back to our to my sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and then deputy chief and chief. We're all in that same building, and say, hey, I met with this stakeholder in the community, and they gave me a list of concerns and frustrations. And I sat down with somebody at the precinct level, and we went over a plan of how we were going to combat these issues. And when I checked in with the stakeholder, this is what I received. What can we do to fix this? So that's just one example, response call times. And no, we're not going to be maybe in a place where we will have very close-knit relationships with people in these specific communities, because we're a little bit more nomadic in character. Like, we are advocates within the department for these different communities, different cultures, but we'll move around because we need to make sure that we're addressing other places that have not gotten attention. So opposed to a precinct level community engagement team where they stay in that area and they get to know the people in these communities that they're serving, we are doing it and just moving around. We will always stay in contact with the people and the communities that we partner with, and that we will always be available via phone, via email. And if they want to meet us again, we're happy to do that. But our job is to move on to the next place where they're being underserved and there's a lack of attention. So we can address these issues, and not just for the sole purpose of doing that, but to build a relationship and partnership. And so that people in the communities, rather than it being like we're addressing their community, it's our community. I could go on, but I'm not, because I know in respect of time, I'm now going to go ahead and pass the baton on to Officer Reed. Thank you so much.
I would gladly take the baton. I'm not going to take too much of everybody's time. And like Natalia said, following Beth was a big thing. Following Natalia is a big thing now. But I just want to kind of piggyback a little bit about what Officer Johnson said, and focus on the individuals in our group so that you all know what our outreach is now. So like, we have a Kurdish liaison that's specifically working with the members of that community, and she knows the culture, she knows the language, she knows, where the issues are and how to start that conversation with them. We have an Asian liaison, the El Protector, our Hispanic liaison. If you're looking at the screen, the El Protector program has actually been around for a bit now. So the other positions are more so us reaching those communities in a new look, where before, yes, we responded to calls, but now we're actually, applying that time to them to find out, okay, I don't want to just come to your call when you call us. Like, we want to know what you need, for your community at all times. So we have that. We have the elderly liaison. We have a liaison that specifically focuses on individuals without housing. We have a school liaison who has been around for a long time, and he is awesome at what he does in connecting with Mnpd in the schools, and then also a special needs liaison who's great at what she does as well. So those are the specific liaison positions, but keep in mind, like, we are a new unit. So every day, like someone's like, you know what, I've noticed that this community needs some attention. So I'm going to add them to my to-do list, you know, to make some connections and figure out who I need to talk to as well. So every day we're growing. That's just the specifics right now. If you're also looking at the screen, myself, I'm the LGBTQ liaison. We started this position back in 2019. I'm the second liaison. And we also started the Safe Place program. Well, if you're not familiar with that, that's basically where businesses sign up for the Safe Place initiative. They put this decal on their business to say, hey, if you're in trouble, you can come into our business. I don't care what you look like. I don't care what's going on, but we're going to put you in a safe place and call police. So that's two of the programs, initiatives that we have. And, you know, stay tuned for our department. We're making moves, and we have a new chief, and he's doing great things within the department. But definitely the Kurdish community, the Asian community, those are two communities. Even with talking to the liaisons that we have, it's a lot that I didn't know. So us coming together as a group, our meetings and things like that, it's a great thing. It's real conversation that we have that needs to be had. Working with Beth with the Family Safety Center, that's more conversations that happen. We meet up. She'll reach out all the time and just say, hey, what's going on in your world, basically. And, you know, we go back and forth. So just starting the communication is very important. And then you all have our contact information. If there's things that you're seeing or that you're doing that you want us to know about, definitely let us know that too.
Y'all are awesome. I sincerely enjoy working with you, and thank you for everything that you do courageously, gently, with determination, and with real connection. Thank you. All right, we're going to wrap things up. Last question. What services are available? We've already touched on some of those. Brief note about the Family Intervention Program. Even though it is under the umbrella in our own agency in the Domestic Violence Program, we can serve anyone who's been affected by any kind of crime. So anyone who's been impacted by a crime, regardless of one's immigration status, regardless of their preferences for prosecution or not, anyone can receive services after being a victim of crime. I'm just going to let you guys, I'm just throwing that all up there. Okay, there's my contact information. I think we've really touched on a lot of these. Really, is companioning with a person through all the different systems that they may be having to engage with after becoming a victim of crime. And I use that word victim. I know sometimes we're a little allergic of that word, but kind of just in the if I might say, like the federal glossary of someone who's been impacted. Highlighting two state programs, our criminal injuries compensation program and our Save at Home program. So the first is for any eligible expense, they may be compensated. So the individual may not be compensated directly, but the expense that let's say they've had to pay, true story, $130,000 for a traumatic medical bill at paying her bill. Well, then criminal injuries may be able to knock that out for the victim. The Safe at Home program is an address confidentiality program. So both of these we explain and assist with applications. Also, it's something that's not on here because often this is for our folks who may be Spanish speaking, but the U visa, T visa, VAWA, self-petition, those are other immigration reliefs that we can help navigate. So, our jobs look so different day to day. I'm very thankful to be one of 5 advocates, all the other advocates with our program are bilingual Spanish and English. So I'm the only one who doesn't speak another language, but I get to use the language line many times. So very thankful also for my linguistic background in teaching. I think that's been so helpful in connecting and understanding and learning. So this.
Hey, sorry. There's a question before you move on from Megan about whether or not that applies to secondary victims as well, such as the children of the crime victim, or yes, does that?
That's a great question, Megan. So oftentimes, let's say a child involved in a domestic violence situation, they may really fall under the category of being a victim. It just depends on the kinds of victimizations, and not to get too nitty gritty, but yes, I guess the safest answer is maybe. Certainly when something traumatic happens, a lot of people are impacted. And so if you're impacted, if your life is touched by that crime, then yes, you should be able to receive services. So specifically, if we're talking about like the state programs, like criminal injuries comp, safe at home, then they have very specific definitions for who is eligible, and those secondary victims may not be. Sometimes there's workarounds, so it just depends. I would say, especially for like safe at home, if that person is in need of protection or safety, then there's probably a way that we can ask and see what can be provided. Just offering this Google Doc, that's the community sheet that you see in front of you, and I freely offer to different folks who, and it's available in these 21 other languages. So again, we might be able to text that out to someone. We offer it at different outreach events, just so that folks know that services in the language of their choice should be available. There are a lot of great resources out there. I highly recommend NEWAP, the National Immigrant Women's Advocacy Project. Great resources, great research. Also, the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence. They have wonderful culturally specific advocacy resources. I received the Bridging Refugee Youth and Children Services emails, which are full of amazing translated materials, guides, wonderful, wonderful resources. So also, we're very, very happy to announce that the new brochure for refugees and immigrants that Chloe has worked so hard on is available. So I think Chloe will be telling us more about that at our Inclusivity Committee meeting. But there it is, isn't it beautiful? So excited to share that more with you guys. Very, very thankful for the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence for letting us be a part of this project. Yeah, thank you. So the task force on refugees and immigrants, I mentioned that briefly earlier. This is just a couple photos from our latest newsletter. You can sign up for updates. There's a link to that newsletter archive and ways to sign up on our Facebook page. So just facebook.com Nashville Task Force. Please join us next Tuesday if you're interested. And we're 10 minutes over, but any other questions? There's our contact.
I would like to say that you're being extremely modest. Beth worked tirelessly with me on that brochure. So it was not just, the credit is definitely not all or even half due to me. All the credit goes to Beth, and I'll take a little bit of credit in putting it together.
100% of that design, my friend.
This was so fantastic and an absolute wealth of knowledge. All three of you, thank you all so much for presenting today and giving us so much knowledge moving forward with our direct services for victims. Do we have any questions before we end today, or any other comments that anyone would like to share?
Outside that it was awesome. That's pretty much the only comments that I have. You guys did a great job. Yeah.
Thanks, Phyllis.
You're
Thanks.
welcome.
Thanks for joining us.
It was a pleasure to be here. I'll be messaging you too about something else that we have coming up on our end later on this year.
Cool.
Awesome. All right. If you need anybody's contact info, it's up on the screen. If you need my contact info, I think most of you have it, or if you scroll up, it's in the chat. So if there's nothing else, thank you, thank you, thank you. Rounds and rounds of applause for all three of you. I appreciate you all so much.
Yay. Thank you.
Y'all have a great day and weekend.
Mhm.